So my friends, on behalf of the Hamilton Naturalist Club, welcome to the 5th virtual bird study group meeting. My name is Jackson Hudecki, and I am the bird study group director for the Hamilton Naturalist Club. Very pleased to be here and very happy that you are able to join us tonight. Thank you very much. As always, we, for the most part, can't speak for everybody, but are settlers on this land here in North America, and always like to do our part to acknowledge and recognize the Indigenous people who are very deeply connected to the earth in the same ways that, in similar ways that we hope to be here in the work that we do as naturalists, and perhaps even in our careers. And our Hamilton study area encompasses, of course, a lot of the traditional First Nation lands. And so hopefully we're all doing our part to stay connected to Indigenous communities, whether it's in just in our readings, and of course in how we carry ourselves on a regular basis. If you're new to the bird study group meeting, for the first time in probably the BSG history, we are virtual, and we likely will be for the majority of 2021. In fact, I've had a few people reach out to me and ask, are you going to continue to be virtual even once the pandemic is over and or people are vaccinated? And I'd like to say yes. I think that this is something that has been able to reach a lot of people in places that we typically haven't been able to connect. We've been able to have some speakers from parts of Ontario that have not had to travel in order to present to the club, which has been phenomenal. And so why not? Why not continue to be virtual? And so that is something that hopefully we'll be able to do. So we'll be able to get BSG meetings right into your home. We start every month at 7:30. We do meet once a month. And we have a special guest after some intros and some announcements. In fact, we've been working in a few special guests. And our presenters tonight are going to be touching on something that is, of course, very important, which is why they're here. And so if this is your first time here, we typically wait to the very end to take on a bit of a Q&A. So if you do have questions, we'll be able to connect with you later on in the meeting, which is great. At the bottom of this function, there should be a Q&A tab that you can type your questions into. And of course, the chat is open, so you can be submitting anything into the chat. So the goal of the bird studies group, again, if this is your first time, or if you haven't been in a while, what we thought to do is just try and keep connected to the birds beyond what we're just seeing and hearing in the field. We like to bring a bit of a broader conversation right to us and to talk about what's important and what's relevant in the birding community. We've had several speakers this year so far, which has been great, and we want to elevate people who are doing the work to be helping birds and anything pertaining to birds itself, whether it's certain efforts or certain trends, which we'll talk about some trends, I think, in a little bit, but of course threats and any sort of predictions, anything really pertaining to birds. And I've had some people reach out with some speakers that perhaps would be great for us to be connecting with in the future, because we will meet again February, March, April, and May, maybe even June, maybe we'll even go right through the summer. But we're just trying to just keep birds relevant, even on a night like tonight in January, which, you know, I was putting my slides together and I erased everything from the December meeting, and I was like, what am I going to put in here? And I sat and I stared at the screen for longer than I'd care to admit, because I feel like we're in this stage of the pandemic where, like, I mean, this is just carrying on, and it's not going anywhere, and we're really just getting, I mean, we're already used to things, but, you know, I've been seeing the word fatigue a lot lately. And, you know, everyone went through the holiday season and we've come out the other side of it, and we're into 2021. And I mean, we're already seeing some very unusual things happening, especially south of the border in 2021. And I thought just to leave this blank. I mean, I spend many days already sitting at the computer. This might be my 10th hour today, just already sitting at a computer. And of course, we need time to get up and stretch and move around and go birding. And so if you're here right now, the 57 people in this room right now, thank you very much for being here, because things definitely are weird. And so if we can use birds to kind of collect, our craziness a little bit, then hey, birds are doing their part once again. For in the area, there has been a lot of activity. Um, so the Pacific loon persists in the West Harbor, which is amazing. I've got a photo here from Morad, who posted a probable California gull. I mean, like, I'm at the bottom end of intermediate birders, I'd say, and like I wouldn't even fathom a California gull showing up in the HSA. But hey, here we are, right? Common redpolls, perhaps some hories showing up as well. People are talking about ruffed grouse. I know that Liam has been going bonkers about trying to find a snow goose, so hopefully he was able to find that. Some white-winged crossbills remain in the area. Some hermit thrush are making some appearance. Glen Morris is getting some very regularly occurring evening grosbeaks, which I think I'm going to break my 5 MR radius to try and get out to Glen Morris and see some evening grosbeaks, which would be a lifer for me, so I might try and do that. Sedgwick Park continues to be a spot where some cool birds are hanging out. So Parula, ruby crowned kinglet, orange crowned warbler are hanging out there, which is pretty cool. But what are you seeing that excites you? Let us know in the chat if there's something that you've seen in the Hamilton study area, in your own backyard, now that we're in a lockdown, in your own backyard, something that you're seeing that perhaps, again, is causing you to be excited about the beginning of 2021. Heck, what was your first bird of 2021? New Year's morning, I was sleeping with the window open a little bit, and I woke up to the sound of some American crows calling outside. And then I took my dog for a walk that morning and saw American crows in Victoria Park in Hamilton. So those are my official first birds of 2021. What were yours? Let us know. Tonight was supposed to be the night that Mark Peck was going to come collect some bird specimens for us. And so we had to postpone that. Mark sends his regrets to the club about that. He is keen to get our specimens. I know I have 2 eastern screech owl specimens waiting to be collected by him, and I know others have some as well. So hang on to those for just a little bit longer, because I mean, sure, they're taking up room, but hey, they're not going anywhere. So that part is that. I'm just checking the chat really quickly, and I'm getting a beard compliment by Lynn Hannah Folks, which is incredible. Thank you, Lynn. I did try to put this on Facebook Live, Irene. I was into some trouble. Northern Cardinal is something that is regular. Oh, is that a Q&A? Maybe that's part of the Q&A. I don't have my thing all the way open. I'm going to kind of skip through some of this, even though I can see that Liam did say that a Northern Cardinal was his first, which is great. But I'm going to skip through that just for now. I'll let you guys entertain yourself in the chat while I continue through this PowerPoint. So in a partnership with Environment Hamilton, the Naturalist Club and Environment Hamilton are looking to hear your stories about nature. We want to know just get some insight into your brains, into your stories, into what you've been encountering through a new project. And I know in talking to people when I encounter you birding, or when we do connect, that I know everyone has stories about nature and fun things that you see. Perhaps you'd like to share that on a broader scale. If you would like to learn a bit more about this before committing, you can take part in a quick session on the 20th with Jen Baker of the Naturalist Club to just get a sense of what this would entail. And so if you wanted to learn more, you can reach out to land@hamiltonnature.org. You can see that on the slide here. And perhaps you can lend your voice and your stories to this project, which would be pretty cool. Speaking of which, speaking of stories, looking to have Chris, if we could try and bring one Mr. Rob Porter into the fold here, so we can just get a quick recap of the 100th annual CBC. So Rob, I see you're here. You can unmute yourself and throw on your camera. There he is. Speaking of beards, how are you, sir?
All right, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Can you hear me good?
Yeah, got you all right. What have we found you up to tonight?
At home? Not anywhere special, that's for sure.
Congrats on the a very successful 100th
Yeah.
annual Christmas bird count. Um, what caught you this year? What was something that that you noticed this year? What are some
Hmm.
highlights? Give us an update beyond the email that you sent everybody of what you thought about the CBC this year.
Well, it was a strange year, that's for sure. I covered most of the highlights in the report, but certainly the number of people signing up, the number of different groups, the the fact that we covered so much more than usual. We got those urban zones. We had people requesting urban zones even, which is neat because it's a fact that Hamilton's more urban than it used to be, and for a while the count kind of just treated that as territory that's being eaten away from the count and no longer considered part of the count. But I've tried to aim to make better use of that space in terms of the count, and so we can have more accurate representation of how many pigeons and birds like that are around, but also the urban birds that are coming through and staying in the winter. Like last year we had those was it last year or 2 years ago we had the Eurasian collared doves, of course. This year I think this is the first year we've ever covered the industrial corridor, and found that there's mockingbirds out there. Of course there's mockingbirds out there, and we weren't counting them before because they love the rail lines and things like that. So that was a bit different. Everyone's
Cool.
got a different story. And some people say I'm out there and there's nothing barely out there, and other people finding interesting stuff. But I think what's neat is overall together, even if each individual story was maybe a little less than previous years, there were more people out there, more effort, so we got more birds, more things covered than usual.
And so, I mean, I've been hearing this question from a few people. What kind of impact do you think COVID has had for the birds or for the club or for this count?
Mm-hmm. Well, it made it a lot more difficult for coordinating in terms of groups, certainly. There were a lot more requests, and this is a good thing, a lot more requests from new birders to go out with veteran birders, but less veteran birders to go around for that. Plus, we don't want any large groups, so couldn't have any, groups of 5 or 6 like the previous year. It was mostly just 2 or 3. You can of course do things social distance wise, but you got to keep numbers small so that everyone feels comfortable on that. And yeah, I mean that bodes well for future years. I think we got a lot more interest. We got interest from people outside of not outside the region, but outside of the city, in areas where we don't have count areas, that were interested in counting, and we just didn't have anything out where they were at, but they were okay with coming in and seeing if they could cover something in the circle, even if they lived out in Carlisle where we don't cover, they could come down to Waterdown, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think one of the questions I've heard is, like, are how are the birds
Mm,
impacted by COVID? And some people are saying, like, I think there's more wildlife around because there's less air traffic, there's less movement of people.
yeah.
I have a thought behind that. Do you think there's any sort of connection between that?
There'll have to be something for sure. First thing comes to mind, there'll be probably more feeders out there right now. A lot of people looking in their backyards. Um, there still is a fair bit of noise. There's not as much, I guess. As someone who does a lot of field recordings and the audio, I can tell with audio, I can tell there's still a lot of noise out there, but it's just, it's different now. There's not as it was the way more before, and now it's a little less. There is, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of other effects in there. Uh,
I just kind of I kind of thought it was more. people just were becoming more aware of their surroundings and like,
Yeah, definitely that.
wow, there's birds in my park. Like, it's because of COVID? It's
Yes.
like, I think you're just noticing
Yes.
your surroundings more because
I would agree there.
our heads and our minds aren't. I mean, they still very much are in many different places, but you know, like, hey, you can't travel, so walk around your neighborhood. It's like, I
Yep.
didn't know. Like, look at that. What is that? Is that an eagle? Like, people start to
Yep.
see birds more
Yeah,
as their
definitely.
surroundings. And I think though I have noticed a lot of raptors in the urban core. So I don't know if that will be something that, and that's just something that I'm noticing in my own neighborhood. But
Certainly, we had the more reports of eagles this year. Of course, the turkey vultures, which we struggle most years to get them during count day. Usually, it's count week. We get them. We got a ton of them count day.
mm,
Ravens was really interesting. I mean, the fact that we had just even one flock with 7 in it alone, that alone broke the record, that one flock. So
that's pretty cool.
some changes going on there for sure.
So 100th annual bird count. Would you rate it as a
Oh
success?
yeah,
Would
for
you?
sure. And yeah. So hopefully next year we can have our celebration and everything. I mean, technically the 100th count happens on your 99th year because your first count happens on your 0 year, right? So next year is the centenary, 101st count, but centenary. So we can make it up there.
Yeah, for those who, for
But
those who don't things in the mix to celebrate the 100th. But yeah, as you're saying, maybe we can just kind of usher that into next year.
yep.
Um, what was the big thing you were planning again for the 100th for this year?
We were looking at doing an ebook with those compiled list of every report, all the 100 reports, which I have most of them. There is, and they're not into ebook form yet, but I do have, I know we're all, I will say 97 of them are, I think it is at the moment. I know most of them are. There are a couple stray ones we haven't been able to find, but we haven't done the deep dive yet into, asking like the UFT library to track down a particular issue of bird lore, which is what one of them I'm probably going to have to do that for. Other ones, it'll probably be just, finding a particular issue of Canadian wildlife, or was it off the top of my head, but Canadian field naturalist, I think. But any case, there are all kinds of places we use to publish too, starting with Bird Lore, which is the Audubon's magazine way back then, and then Canadian Field Naturalist, and then we started self-publishing in the Wood Duck eventually, and to email. That's when it got easy, finding old wood ducks.
Awesome. Well, then people can look forward perhaps to something like that coming out in 2021.
Yeah.
You're in charge of our I say our, but it's our bioacoustics project, and
Mm-hmm.
people are really talking right now about owls.
Yeah.
Um, are you picking anything up these days with
Oh
your
yeah.
bioacoustics? Can you give us a quick glimpse before we let you go?
Yeah. So the other day I retrieved one of our recorders from the Sheila Dunduli Sanctuary, and lo and behold, I haven't checked every single morning, that duet of great horned owls at sunrise. So that was kind
And
of
pretty,
neat. Yeah.
and so the Sheila Dunduli Nature Reserve is a recently just, I shouldn't say, I should say donated parcel of
Mm-hmm.
land kind of near the 403 and Highway 6,
Mm-hmm.
named after Sheila
Mm-hmm.
Dunduli, who donated the biggest donation in the HNC history in order to allow the club and Jen Baker to purchase that piece of land. So many thanks go out to Sheila Dunduli and her family. Um, and so were they close enough that you think they're nesting around there, or are you
Probably.
hearing it as if they're just kind of in the valley
No,
near Henry Valley?
they were probably right above the recorder.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's not the spot I put it at. I actually put it on a pine tree and they were probably in that pine tree every time, I think. So there was only a handful of pine trees right there, and they're just so close, so loud. Like most of our bioacoustics, when we're finding an owl, it's like quiet. You can tell it's an owl, but it's like just slightly far away, so it's hard to spot on the spectrograph. If you're listening, you can kind of hear it, but this one was just blatant. It was just obvious. It's right there. There's an owl, two
Um,
owls even. So,
Perhaps in the chat after this, you can provide people a link, because I know that a lot of your recordings have gone into kind of a podcast mode. Not your podcast, not the
no,
Songbird podcast, but
no,
there
but
is a place where people can listen to some of these recordings. Would you mind
yep.
linking that in the chat after? People could take
Yeah,
a listen
yeah.
if they want to.
Songscapes. And for those of you who have joined the Hamilton Naturals Club Discord, I posted some of those up to there as well too. And
Cool.
so we'll share those. Also, I'd like to make sure at some point that bioacoustics, he's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting lately.
Which shows you how many squares each species increased in, or how many more squares it was found in Atlas 3 than in Atlas 2. And these are ranked by the species that increased the most. So to some extent, it's not all that surprising. Canada geese too. The house finch moved into the province in the 80s and expanded greatly. But beyond that, a lot of interesting things showing up in here. Blue-headed vireo, I think, with the maturation of the conifer forest, the plantations in southern Ontario really expanded in southern Ontario. Turkey vultures continued expanding in. Then we had a lot of big birds show up on here. You see the turkey vulture, the wild turkey, the bald eagle, sandhill crane. Some of the big birds expanded a lot, and we think that had a lot to do with basically a lot of those numbers recovering from being shot out by the settlers when they first moved into the province. Tendency for some of the mature forest birds like pileated woodpeckers to show up here, like the forest in southern Ontario. Southern Ontario is much more forested than it increases continuing as the forests expand. And like the yellow dots are squares that the birds were found in Atlas 2, but not in Atlas 1. So you can see there's just a few squares down around long point where the birds were released in the early 80s, and they started to show up, a few over in Eastern Ontario and Northumberland, but really they just exploded throughout Southern Ontario. And of course, they've continued to explode. It'll be interesting if we find any squares that don't have turkeys this time in the Atlas, even right up to Sudbury and beyond. They seem to be everywhere. Sandhill cranes expanding from the north. Again, first Atlas, just a few squares up around Sault Ste. Marie and across the North Channel, one or two on Bruce Peninsula as they'd moved in. But Atlas 2, you can see all these yellow dots. They'd expanded right throughout southern Ontario, at least as far as the major West. Berlin, another one that just exploded between the Atlases. And again, expecting we'll find a lot more dots down here in southern Ontario. It's thought these raptors, maybe the increase was something to do with the decline of DDT in the environment after it was banned in the 70s. The numbers are still rebuilding from that. Carolina Wren, familiar one for you guys. We're expecting continued expansion to the north, although really it's still a pretty uncommon bird, even in Guelph, I can tell you, but we can expect more birds expanding. And this is true for quite a few of the Carolinian, what we used to think of as Carolinian species, so red-bellied woodpeckers and gnatcatchers and other things that barely come into the province. In the south here, hooded warblers, another good example, that continuing to expand quite a bit, moving north and building up. So on the other side, quite a few species between the two atlases. And one of the patterns that showed up here right away was the decline of the aerial insectivores that that Kaylin talked about. And she may have even shown you this graph, but a lot of, so the nighthawk, the swift, the bank swallow, the barn swallow, cliff swallow, were among the biggest declines. They were still quite common birds, but formerly much more widely distributed across the landscape than they were in Atlas II. It's going to be interesting to see how much that that decline has continued. Some indicate leveling off in recent years. Some other things in here, what else? The grassland birds in particular showed big declines. So, well, vesper sparrows and open country birds like kingbird. Blue-winged teal is sort of a grassland bird that has declined quite a bit and continuing to decline. You probably noticed blue-winged teals seem to be getting harder and harder to find all the time. Great horned owl had quite a large decrease between the two atlases too, which is a little harder to explain. So just to show you a few graphs here, some of the ones that leapt out at us. I mentioned the grassland birds. The black dots here show the squares where the species wasn't in Atlas II, but was in Atlas I. So upland sandpipers declined considerably in across the agricultural parts of southern Ontario. Still pretty good numbers along the edge of the Canadian Shield. The Alvars on Carden and over Napanee, still fairly good numbers in Atlas II, but my strong impression is that this species is continuing to decline. To start thinking about this bird as a species at risk. Loggerhead shrike, which is sort of the ultimate of the Alvar birds, really declined between Atlas I and Atlas II. The current map's probably going to look something like that again, or maybe even smaller. Very few pairs now left, less than 50 pairs certainly in the province now. But those aerial insectivores really show the largest decline overall. So purple martins, you can see large decline, especially more in the northern part of the range and in the interior. They still seem to be, we're hanging on around the edges of the Great Lakes. All those squares still have lots of birds in them. And the Niagara Peninsula is obviously relatively rich in them. It's going to be interesting to see if those declines have continued in Atlas III. Another of the nightjars, the one that showed the biggest decline, the nighthawk, declined away from the urban areas quite markedly. Still hanging on along the edge of Georgian Bay and across the edge of the Canadian Shield in the Alvars and other open habitats. Still quite an abundant bird in the remote north, though, in the old burns. There's still lots of them up there. Just the decline seems to be primarily happening in the south. Okay, so sort of a quick quiz. You can test yourself on this. Some of you may know this because I talked about this at the end of Atlas II, but we were able to determine which are the commonest birds in the province. I'm just going to run through, I think, the top 10 in reverse order. So some of the answers will be surprising if you haven't done this before. So common grackle comes in at 3 million, starling at 4, redwing at 4, Swainson's thrush at 8 million, red-eyed vireos. Oh, changing software does interesting things to your slide layout sometime. Red-eyed vireo up at 9, American robin at 10 million. Whoops. White-throated sparrow. There's a whole bunch of them here that come in at 12 million. And these are all birds of the northern forests, and the vast majority of their populations are up in the boreal forest. Some quite surprising to some extent, golden crown kinglets and such. We only see them on passage most of the time anyway. But then the winner overall, a lot of people's surprise, was the Nashville warbler. Came out at 15 million birds estimated to be in the province. So it's going to be fascinating to see how much that's changed between the two atlases. With the new modeling that we can do and the new statistical techniques, it's possible some of these numbers will get shifted around, but anyway, be fascinating. So what's so enjoyable about atlases? You've got your local square. You're really an enjoyable aspect of it, and the little spots inside those squares that can be quite fascinating. Birds you're just not expecting to find are gonna show up in the oddest of places. So really enjoy an interesting aspect of the project. We're all in this together. So all the data that you contribute is adding to the big pot and is data more useful, and my data makes your data more useful. We're all working together, filling in the gaps, and there's a real community spirit can build up around that, and it's quite an enjoyable aspect of the project. We are hoping to find roles for all birders, so no matter your level, there is a way you can participate in the project. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And that going out there and filling in the checklist is really a fun thing. Trying to find all the birds that nest in that square. You're really testing yourself as to how are you going to find that missing. Say you don't have a yellow-bellied sapsucker. You want to find the sapsucker. Okay, how am I going to find a sapsucker? You have to go about trying to work out that kind of thing and heading out. And it's very satisfying when you actually do go out and find one in your square. You can do so you can go to remote areas if you're into that kind of thing. We're looking for people with good wilderness survival skills, good canoeing skills, and good birding skills to go into the remote north. But you don't have to atlas on foot. You can go by bike. You can canoe. You can kayak. Any way that's going to get you to all the different places in the square. And we're going to be encouraging people to do that. And of course, behind all this, while you're out having fun collecting information on the birds, is the knowledge that it's really a very valuable tool for conservation and scientific purposes. So there's real satisfaction to it all. List of all the ways that you can participate. I mentioned earlier about principal atlasers, and Rob's already got people signed up as principal atlasers in the square. They're responsible for making sure that square gets done. If you have the skill set, you can identify birds by size. Squares already have principal atlasers, but you are welcome to participate in any square, submit checklists anywhere in the province. And certainly if you have a cottage or you have friends who have a cottage, or you like to camp, getting Central and Northern Ontario covered is a huge challenge for us, and we really want to get people doing that. Mentoring, we're going to be, once COVID's over, we're going to be encouraging people to be getting together for experienced birders and atlasers to be working with newer people and helping them learn more about the birds and how to actually atlas for them. There are special surveys. We have 6 total surveys, special surveys that we're working on protocols for. So if you want to do those, if you're not an expert birder, you can identify what a screech owl sounds like and a great horned owl sounds like. We have tapes that allow you to learn and run surveys for some of those, for the owls or the nightjars or some of those other specialized species. You're welcome to submit data incidentally anywhere in the province. If you're driving along the road, the one we use all the time is if you see a pair of red-tailed hawks sitting in a tree in the spring, that's a pair. The birds are probably breeding in that square, and we'd like to get that record into the atlas. But anything that you're doing, if you come across something with breeding evidence, if it's at all an unusual species, get it into the that aren't getting, that don't have much attention on them yet. We're going to be having Square Bash events where we invite all the atlases in the province up to Algonquin Park, say, and we'll take a block of squares up there, and we'll cover those for a week or two in the middle of the summer, and you can come and go and fit in with that kind of process. ARUs I'll talk about in a second, but if you are a bird photographer, we're still asking for bird photos because we can use them for lots of different purposes with our social media and the website and presentations like this. All of our materials have to get translated. So if you are expert in French, we're actually interested in people helping us with some translations. And we have had people in the past, not necessarily then help us with bird stuff, but we're just helping us getting in and out of Northern Ontario and helping arrange northern trips. If that kind of thing is of interest to you, let us know and we can accommodate you on that. So I mentioned the ARUs. So here we have birders out collecting data for the Atlas, but I'm sure Rob's been telling you all about ARUs, these autonomous recording units. This is going to be a huge part of data collection for the Atlas, especially in the north. I work with the Wildlife Service, and with the Wildlife Service, we're going to be putting out hundreds of these across Northern Ontario, programming them to collect data at the right time of year and the right time of day, seasons, and then getting all that data into systems where they can be in the Atlas. There's actually a boreal monitoring program being developed across Canada, and the Atlas is fitting together with that, so that we're helping meet goals of both projects at the same time. I won't spend too much time on this, but there are lots of ways that the Atlas data has been used, particularly for species that are at risk, devise recovery strategies and action plans for them, identify critical habitat based on those checklists, for conservation planning. After the last percent of a habitat in a square to be in a reasonably natural state in order to have most of the birds that you want to get in that square. And so that's actually been adopted now by a number of municipalities across the province who are actually working towards that 30% habitat cover. And lots of different things. The data is used for impact assessments. It's identifying and managing protected areas. And as Kaylin told you, lots of different applications for trying to work out, or at least give data that is going to help people learn why the aerial insectivores have been changing. So lots of different ways that it gets used. eBird, lots of you will be collecting data on eBird. We're sort of well aware of that, and we are actually going to be sending out a note soon to all eBirders, encouraging them to participate in the Atlas project. You can specify that all of your data that you collect for the Atlas on your checklists or point counts goes directly into, goes to the Atlas and then into eBird. Or you can actually use eBird to collect Atlas data and then submit it to the Atlas. And there's stuff on the website to explain how you do that. It's really quite a simple process. The difference is eBird doesn't collect all the data that we want for the eBird. Say the details on the rare species that eBird might not recognize as rare that we want areas to collect data for the Atlas. And we'll be providing more information on that over the spring as those negotiations get wrapped up. So we have a website, birdsontario.org. I encourage you to go and poke around on there. If you're newer for birding, or now that it's wintertime and you want to refresh on your bird songs, we have learning resources on there. And the key one on there is Dendroica, and there's a link on there to your email address. We can get messages to you about the project. We're putting out a newsletter later this month that will go out to all participants and try and keep you up to date on what's happening. So there's pictures of folks from Atlas 2 out there enjoying themselves in every corner of the province. and we're hoping you'll be joining us in doing this work. We have done it twice. This is Glen Cody fording a stream up on the Hudson Bay lowlands back in Atlas II. That snow on the ground behind him, when you first go up in May and June, it's still going on really well. And because of nests shown on Hamilton in the Toronto area of great horned owls are already active. I think climate change is having a huge effect on these sorts of things. I looked up the old records, and as of 1987, the earliest record in the province was January 31st of a great horned owl nest, and already, as of several days ago, there were two nests in High Park and in around that area of Toronto. And the hornlarks are going to be coming back soon, and we can start to count those once they settle onto their territory. So really encourage you to get out there and get involved in this. And we have contact information here. You can get hold of Kaylin at Average on Instagram, and please learn it on those different media. As well as the 5 sponsors, we have a lot of supporters already supporting the project. I just want to say thanks to those folks for helping make the Atlas possible. And now I'm going to hand region.
All right, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I'm going to focus just on the Hamilton region, and well, here's a map showing it. It encompasses 31 of these 10-kilometer squares. It includes most of the city of Hamilton, but not all, actually. The southwest part of Burlington, which is the only part of Halton region in it. It includes western Niagara region, including Grimsby and West Lincoln, and pretty much all of Haldimand County, and just the eastern part of Brant County. I mean, I think we'll find it in a few squares, but you know, hopefully, upland sandpiper. Again, Mike, this species, like in Atlas II, we found it in 19 squares. It's probably been extirpated from the city breeding in areas it used to in Flamborough and even in Saltfleet. There probably will be some sites in the west part of Niagara region and in Halton County, but nowhere near the 19 squares, I don't think. Golden wing warbler. We had it in 7 squares in Atlas II, and that in Atlas II it had declined greatly from Atlas I, largely due to interbreeding with and competition, I guess, with the blue wing warbler. Again, I think it's probably been extirpated from the Hamilton area as a breeder. Certainly, it does come through as a migrant, but if we find it at all a breeder, I'll be really happy. Carolinian sites along the Niagara Escarpment, and mostly in the Dundas Valley area. Last few years, it seems to have been absent as a breeder, and I'm hoping we do turn it up in these sites. Habitat's still there, I think, and last one I've listed here is ringneck pheasant. Not a native species to North America, but one that's very appealing to a lot of people as an introduced species. It had been found in 18 squares in Atlas II, but it has become very rare now. It's rarely seen, anywhere in our area. My sense is it's likely extirpated as a sustaining population in our region, if not most of southern Ontario, and probably largely due to predation from things like coyotes, which have expanded greatly. The few sightings that are occurring are likely birds that are released by hunters. Most of them don't persist for more than a year. So if we actually get some confirmed breeding for pheasant, that'll be quite interesting, I think. And next slide, which is my last one. Thought I'd end off with just giving maybe some predictions on the more positive side for the Region 15. Fish crow, species that has moved into our part of southern Ontario, has been confirmed as a breeder in the province in the last few years. And in our region, I think there'll be 3 to 4 squares where we'll potentially get it as breeding, including that square with the 2 tiny slivers of land. Certainly, it appeared that they had nested at a site right in that little spot there last year. Another corvid, common raven, has expanded greatly south into the province. It was not recorded as a breeder during Atlas II in our region, but since then it's been breeding in many squares, even in urban areas, like right in the city of Hamilton. So I'm sure we'll find it in many squares in the region this time around. Merlin, a species that Mike mentioned already, as another one expanding south into the province. It wasn't recorded as a breeder during last Atlas in our region, but is breeding in many areas now. A lot of urban areas, so I think again we'll find it in a number of squares. Sandhill crane, another species Mike commented on in terms of its expansion. We did have breeding evidence for 1 square during the last Atlas in the lower Grand River area. I think it'll be found in 3 or 4 squares along the lower Grand River. And I think there might be a site in our part of Flamborough that they could be breeding into. So we'll see how that pans out. Barred owl. Interesting. The last few years, there seems to have been a bit of a push of barred owls into our area from more central parts of Ontario. Wasn't recorded in the last Atlas in our area, but in recent years, there's been birds that have been resident in places like Dundas Valley and some places in Flamborough. So not sure if there are pairs yet, but we'll see how that plays out. Wouldn't be surprised if we get some more confirmed evidence for them in the region. Pine siskin, I've mentioned, it wasn't recorded as a breeder last time, but there have been breeding records in the Hamilton area in more recent years. And this winter in particular, there's was a big movement of pine siskins amongst other northern finches into the region. They're still persisting right now. I mean, I had a flock over my place here today, and I think we should look for them in spring in terms of breeding evidence. I think we might, hopefully we'll get lucky and get them as a breeder this time around. And last species I mentioned here is black tern, which has been declining in Ontario generally as a breeder. In the Hamilton area, the last nesting was actually in 1989, a nest that I actually found along the lower Red Hill Creek marshes next to the QEW. And it's been occurring as pretty regularly at some of our wetland sites that have been efforts of wetland restoration, like Windermere Basin, and along with efforts at Coots Paradise and maybe some other sites turn again. So that's kind of my wish for some good news for this Atlas period coming up. And just the last bit I'll mention is just in terms of effort and participation. I think we will get even we had great participation last time around. I think we'll get even better participation now. there's a lot more birders around, and there does seem to be a lot of enthusiasm for the Atlas from what I'm seeing. So I think we'll be able to meet all of our coverage objectives for our region, and a number of our keen atlasers have already been out and recording breeding evidence for great horned owls and screech owls in several squares. So yeah, I think that's a good sign for things to come. So I didn't include my email address anywhere. I'm using my own email address for the time being. So if you need to contact me on any Atlas matters, you can reach me at our Dobos at cogeco.ca. Pretty straightforward. So yeah, that's it for me. And I don't know, Mike, if you have any final words, or if not, we'll turn it over to Jackson.
No, nothing really, Rob, other than just say, yeah, thanks. That was a great summary of the local situation. Yeah, and happy to hand things over to Jackson to see if there's any questions or anything else we can help with.
That's awesome, gents. I really appreciate you both taking the time to walk through this. And like I said earlier, I know that you both have been, well, Mike especially has been delivering a chat to Ontarians pretty regularly about this. We've got quite a who's who of people in the participants, so I know that you've got quite a roster of folks who are able and who are going to be assisting with this immense project. What kind of response do you get from municipalities, you know, when the data is compiled, you know, like when you gather it all and you've got the answers, so to speak, or you've got the data, you know, when you bring this forward, do you get the sense that government bodies are open to hearing about the data? Are you able to bring anything forward to them to say, like, this is working, but this isn't, or we've noticed these trends? Can you speak, Mike, perhaps to, you know, the last couple atlases and relationships to government bodies?
Yeah, I mean, the goal of the Atlas is to get the data together, right? And then to some extent, the Atlas ends, and then it's up to the other organizations. So our 5 partners and scientific organizations and such, so take it from there. But there's been the buy-in I would point to most easily is the provincial level, well, particularly at the federal level. The stuff I mentioned earlier there, the slide, that was all ways in which we at the Wildlife Service are using the data. So it does get an awful lot of use there. Ministry of Natural Resources using it in a lot of ways similar. They have a large species at risk program, and so they a lot of things. They did a program for, not a program, but they produced reports for each municipality after Atlas II on the birds of each of their municipalities. And honestly, I can't tell you what they did with it, but it was produced and provided to them for their own planning purposes. So they knew where significant species were, and they knew what generally how the birds in their area related to the landscape more
yeah,
generally.
maybe if I can add to that, just from my own experience here in Hamilton. Well, many municipalities have planning approaches that see the identification of environmentally significant areas that any future development proposals need to be aware of and try to avoid impacts on. And certainly breeding birds are part of the data set that's used in that whole sort of planning process. In years past, I spent time as a volunteer with the city of Hamilton, who have what's called an environmentally significant areas impact assessment group that it relies on for expertise for such development applications that could potentially impact on designated environmentally significant areas. And the proponents themselves would always utilize data from the last breeding bird atlas as part of their baseline information, if you will, in terms of doing that work. So it becomes integral in sort of the impact assessment approach, if you will.
Do you, and I'm going to suggest to everyone that, again, if you have questions, throw it in the Q&A or in the chat so we can see it, because we do have one from Liam. Do you see the recent changes made by the province to conservation authorities having the breeding bird surveys in the next couple of years? I guess that's for either of you.
Yeah. Well, I don't see, I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, Jackson. I mean, I don't see any direct, it sounds like the conservation authorities are going to have much less of a role in planning than they previously did.
Yeah, I think I was more trying to think about some ecologically sensitive areas where previously a developer would have to relocate wetlands or forests or something in order to get a project going. And I've heard stories about bats. I've heard stories about, again, wetlands and reptiles and amphibians, and there was always kind of rules about, well, this is a sensitive area, so if you are going to build there, you got to make sure you're building something else. You're putting another habitat nearby. Part of me is kind of worried that those kind of partnered projects or remediation efforts might not have to occur going forth. Maybe I haven't looked into too much about that, and I thought perhaps maybe one of you two may have, in following that story along, where, like, geez, if it's easier to develop in some spots, if wetlands, if habitat doesn't have to get reconstructed, that's really going to cause an effect on A, B, C, or D. And I kind of, as an outsider, as again, an intermediate birder, I worry for nature when rules get changed. And for you guys at a higher level, or are seeing things from a bird's eye view, I wondered if you were worried about any impacts that those changes may have. So that was my roundabout way of asking that very broad question. Does that narrow it down a little bit more, Mike, at all?
Well, I think the direction that they're taking sounds like it's liable to, it's liable that there's going to be more likelihood of the kind of things you're describing of happening, right? There's less protection in place because there's a layer of planning there that's, or a layer of input to the planning that's not now available. So yeah, it would mean less use of things like the Atlas and such. But
yeah, but Jackson, like, we're kind of getting into a totally different topic from our subject tonight, but I think the point to make here is that the Breeding Bird Atlas data set is a very important tool for the whole planning process in whatever shape or form it is, at all levels. My career at Environment Canada was spent in the environmental impact assessment at the federal level. And the Atlas was an important data set for that whole process, and will continue to be in the future.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I can admire the amount of work that you all have been doing for decades, and what people before us have been striving for in order to protect the environment, and why you're even doing this in the first place, to then just sometimes see such a callous disregard for the natural world. And I'd hate to see it keep trending in that direction, where what you're doing is so important to prove why we need more habitat. So yeah, I'm looking at it much from an outsider's perspective. I'm only just learning about the Atlas like this year through these chats. So I really appreciate those answers, and I understand how it's stepping farther away from it. So I'll go to some questions. Liam Thorne wants to know where we can find a map for the borders of the Hamilton area, wondering if the Valens Conservation Authority is in it or not.
Valens is actually out of the Hamilton region. It's in a square, I believe, that's in Halton region.
Looks
it
like
might
it's
actually be
partly in
divided.
Halton and partly in Wellington.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 17 TNG.
And the maps, you can find them on the Atlas website. Kaylin, you can probably describe it better than me how to find them.
I can put them in the chat. Is everyone else able to see the chat as well, or just us?
We all can, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
If
Yeah.
you select all panelists and attendees.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So the maps that are currently available are actually the maps that we made for Atlas 2. We're still tweaking with the approach for point counts in Atlas 3, so we haven't finalized that set of maps, but we're expecting to have them up in the next month or so. But yeah, the squares haven't changed though. So maps that you can pull up, even though they're Atlas 2, are still the same squares that we'll have for Atlas 3.
Lynn asks, when using audio recordings for point counts, would you do one long 5-minute recording, or is it better to break it up somehow into 1 to 3 minutes and 4 to 5 minute recordings, for example?
Yeah, well, that'll all be done after the fact. All you'll have to do in the field is record the 5 minutes, and then that'll get fed in the computer, and from the spectrogram and other sources, we'll be able to pinpoint what happens in each minute of the count. But yeah, there's lots of good reasons to collect, to do that all as precisely as possible. There may be people that want to get hold of that data and look at every minute because there are things that it can tell you that the whole 5 minute can't. So we will be doing that, but we're not going to require the volunteers to, because it's challenging to do in the field.
Lynn and Liam both, thank you for your answers. Kaylin has put the link up in the chat for the way to see the maps and the squares, so that's great. There are no questions in the Q&A, and I believe that's all the questions in the chat, and it's 20 after 9, and everyone's been staring at screens likely for a better portion of the day. Gentlemen, and Kaylin as well, is there any final last comments that you would like to leave the participants with today?
I would just encourage everybody who hasn't yet registered for the Atlas, Jackson, to go ahead and do so, and hope to see data coming in from you in the months coming ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just say we are, well, first, thanks everyone for coming and listening today. And we will hope, in the past Atlases, we've had big events and had lots of people come, and we get to meet people and share experiences, and we hope we're going to be able to do that soon. So looking forward to meeting a lot of the folks that are on the call and working with them on the Atlas.
Awesome. Well, these definitely are strange times. And if we can be connecting with our natural world to bring some peace and joy to us by watching some baby birds fledging from some nests, and have some of that joy ourselves, then sharing it with you and you using it for scientific purposes, then hopefully that you get the data that you need in order to kind of keep this project going. Mike, this is your third one. Congrats on again, all of that work that you've been doing. I'm sure that you will still participate in years to come anyways, probably as just an observer.
Well, I hope I have a few more to come, but.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, thanks for taking the time tonight, Rob as well, Kaylin in the background, and everyone at home, thank you for participating in tonight's chat. We'll meet back again in a month. Who knows what birds we'll see in that time. So on behalf of the Hamilton Naturalist Club and the Bird Studies Group, have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.